Hello, my name is EJ Scheidel. We're going to be talking about Texas's intercultural relationships, and yeah, let's just jump right in. So, what we're going to start with is the Texas sort of prideful side. We're going to talk about how this pride in Texas culture, this centricism, egocentrism, is affecting Texas's relationships with other cultures. Now, this is most apparent in foreign cultures, and a very good example of this, albeit old, but it does play in a little later, is the Anglo Baptists of Texas and the reactions to the Mexican and African American Baptists that were sort of immigrating into Texas. Now, in a paper by David Cameron, it this sort of relationship was brought to light, despite the non-hostilities and even the connections that the Mexicans were trying to uh, bring trying to make with the Anglo Baptists. The Anglo Baptists weren't having it. They saw the other two groups as hostile and alien, and they did not like it. Now, this is a very big part because of the Texas pride and their pride in culture, and they felt as though the other two cultures were going to try and change the community of Texas and its culture. And so they sort of try and alienated them or tried to assimilate the other two groups. And the other two groups obviously didn't like this, and this led to some conflict. And again, this is much earlier in Texas's history, about 1900 to 1965 was when this paper is about. But this sort of fear or dislike of foreign cultures is not just limited to the past, it's also very present in the modern day, and this can be seen with Texas's conflict with Mexico. Now, this is a very big thing for the Republican Party, is their stress on immigration and such, but it's very strong in Texas because of how close it is, first of all, and because of how much they don't like foreign entities coming into Texas and trying to change its culture. So, in this article by Manuel Ramirez, sorry, can't talk. It sort of just highlights this conflict that's going on, and Texas is using the drug cartels of Mexico as an excuse. And while there is a drug problem in Mexico, it's not all Mexican people are drug users, or not all part of the cartel, but Texans are still fearful because of this reason. But it's not just because of this reason. This is an excuse, a sort of easy way to say, oh, we don't like them because of this, and this is a very clear problem they have. No, what they're using this as an excuse to sort of generalize and stereotype all of Mexicans that are trying to come in, even though they're not like that, and even though there's already Mexicans in Texas. The Texans are not angry at Mexicans that are already living in Texas. In fact, some of the Mexicans that live in Texas are angry at the immigrating Mexicans, and it's because they've adopted or assimilated this idea of Texas pride and these foreigners, and they're just following along with the excuse of drug cartels being the problem in Mexico. And so we can start to really see Texans' just unwillingness to um, work together with other cultures. They just very resistant to the idea. But it seems to be that it's not all cultures. It's foreign, what is deemed as foreign cultures, and because the Texas is part of the U.S.'s subtle influences into Texas culture is not triggering this as much until it's brought to light. For instance, a article by Mark Busby and Dickie Haberlin brings to light the sort of transition in Texas art from mostly murals and public art that you can be seen in post offices and in the Texas State Fair that show Texans as these stereotypical Texans, cowboys and rough riding, fighting Indians, that type of thing. When most Texans are not like this, and their culture has never really been made for this, or like the history isn't reflecting this, so their culture is just shifting over to the American portrayal by bigger things like Hollywood and its productions. An example being No Country for Old Men. And this sort of subtle influence isn't really detected because of they Texans deem themselves part of the America, and so the media is like, oh, this can't be a problem. But once it is brought to light that there's this change in culture, which is done through a book called State of Mind's Texas Culture and Its Discontent by Don Graham, and the article that I'm reviewing it by, which was Andrew Husband, who reviewed it and summarized it. We can see that through this that once Don Graham saw this influence that U.S. media was having, and he identified it, brought in a few examples that other Texans like Andrew Husband sort of saw this problem, and so they wanted to talk about it. This needs to get out here. This is Texan pride showing in its fullest. The culture is being targeted by something, even though we didn't know it at first, but now we do, so this is a problem. And it just shows how unwilling Texas is to sort of assimilate new ideas just because of their pride in history and culture. And so we're brought to this standstill, or it's not standstill, well, we're brought to this problem. Texas doesn't have a way to solve this because it wants to keep its culture exactly the way it is. And this isn't going to really work. This isn't a way to communicate with other cultures and work together with them at all. And you can see the problem manifest in these violent acts against Mexicans, the violent protests against Mexicans, not vocal protests, not necessarily violent. And the more and more vocal protests against the U.S. media and its stereotyping of Texans and how it's affecting our culture. And it's just a very big problem. There's no fixing it as it is right now. Texans have to be open to taking in some other cultures so that in turn other cultures can come into Texas, more people can live, more people can get used to the area. And without collaborating and compromising in this way, just Texas is going to have a very hard time. They're going to start to be isolated from the rest of the group. In this case, America, or Mexicans might stop coming to Texas. They might move to other states, and that would be a loss of a lot of population for Texas because a lot of immigrants do make up Texas population. So there's this big problem, and there's really only one way for Texans as a whole and a community and culture to fix it, and that is to start working together. That's to start compromising. That's to start facing these problems and not hiding behind excuses like, oh, drug cartels. No, they have to see this perception they have of other cultures as hostile just because they're other cultures. This is egocentrism. It has to be addressed, and then Texans as a whole need to start to see that other cultures aren't necessarily bad. Other cultures aren't necessarily different. They have to sort of get along, just because otherwise it's not a healthy relationship that Texas can have with America as a whole, or other countries as a whole, other people. And that just won't make Texas a good place to live. It won't make it a great culture like Texans think they are. And yeah, that's my video essay, basically. All of the references that I used are either going to be in the description of this video or going to be attached to the document or something. So yeah,